Big weekend for action in the world of mixed martial arts as both the UFC and Bellator held events this weekend, starting first with Bellator 159, which was in Kansas. It featured 4 fights on the main card for Spike TV. Also, one of the undercard fights were shown in as well. Kicked off in the stacked featherweight division for Bellator as former title challenger Daniel Weichel took on one of the up-and-coming stars of Bellator in Emmanuel Sanchez. It was a very close fight between these two at 145 pounds. And while I would have said Weichel was definitely the favorite coming into this fight, and Emmanuel Sanchez, who has fought some tough guys so far in Bellator, in Pat Curran, as well as Justin Lawrence, Daniel Pineda, Henry Corrales. He's fought some very tough guys so far under his Bellator tenure, which started back in October of 2014. But Weichel's a very hard guy to prepare for. Sometimes he can be output heavy, sometimes he can sit back counter, sometimes he can be grappling heavy. He has good submissions, good stand-up. He's a very hard guy to hit, solid, with the exception of the Pitbull fight where he got cracked. He's a very tough guy to try to counteract, a very hard guy to prepare for because he doesn't make too many mistakes. He is a near-perfect fighter. He's very good at what he does. And the first round I thought was close, but I think Daniel Weichel was able to control things, was able to keep Sanchez under control. And then in round 2, I thought Sanchez picked up the pace. And one thing Weichel, one of the few things he doesn't do very well is he doesn't throw a lot of kicks. Not a very kick-heavy attack, not really known for that. Really good with his boxing, his angles, his movement, his footwork. Like I said, a very hard guy to hit. He knows where to be and where not to be at the same time. And I thought Sanchez amped it up. He started really throwing a lot of kicks, not just to the legs, but to the body. Threw a couple to the head as well. But I think that kick-heavy attack, threw Weichel off a little bit. He tried taking it to the ground a couple times in the second round. I didn't think succeeded much in that round. In the third round, was finally able to land a takedown and sustain top control. He had landed some takedowns before, but wasn't able to sustain being on top like he was in that third round. He was on top for about 3.5 minutes. Sanchez tried to kind of gather up a little bit of a comeback there in the third round, but I didn't think he did enough to capture it and probably would have gave Weichel round 1 and 3 with Sanchez winning round 2. And when the decision came down, split decision, I wasn't too surprised because I thought the first round was close. Really, the first 2 rounds I thought were pretty close, but I thought the third round was definitely for sure Daniel Weichel's round. And split decision, 30-27 Weichel, 30-27 Sanchez. And then, of course, the judge who got it right, he's doing some judging now, which I think is really cool, that being Big John McCarthy. I think he's the only judge to get it correct. 29-28 Weichel to win by split decision after all 3 rounds. And Weichel, I think, was probably already in line for a featherweight title shot. Didn't want to wait for Daniel Strauss, who's still recovering from injury. Takes the fight against Sanchez. I think a win by either gentleman put them in that spot to fight Daniel Strauss upon his return. Weichel says he'll fight anybody, but if Strauss isn't ready to come back here, I would say the Bellator's next event they announced last week in England after during the Michael Page fight and all that stuff. Ben Henderson against Pitbull will be the main event of Bellator 160. That's coming in the end of August, about a month away. I think if there's not a set timetable return for Daniel Strauss by then, I think Daniel Weichel should fight for an interim belt, possibly against Pitbull, the other Pitbull. You could maybe make a case Pat Curran. Bubba Jenkins is taking on Georgie Karakhanyan in a rematch coming up, so I don't know how timing-wise things will work out, but there's no shortage of top guys here at 145 pounds for Daniel Weichel to fight if an interim title is coming up. And I'm sure a matchup against Pitbull is something that he would want to do over again, and I think that would probably be the fight to make to me if an interim title is on the table. If not, it should be Weichel versus Strauss. Sanchez, I think it is still relevant. I think he had a close fight. I think he probably, maybe a Yamauchi is in his future, possibly the loser of Jenkins and Karakhanyan, Pitbull, potentially maybe a rematch with Pat Curran. There are definitely matchups, and he's definitely still relevant in this 145 division. But I think Weichel is either going to get an interim title fight or an actual title fight against Daniel Strauss next. I also want to give a shout out to Felipe Lins, who was able to defeat the tough Guillermo Viana, knocking out him in the second round. And that was the only undercard fight that they ended up showing on the main card broadcast. Also, the next fight, Emily Ducati, I believe I said that, against Bruno Vargas. Boy, Emily cracked Vargas early, but then Vargas, definitely the better grappler of the two ladies, was able to take the fight to the ground, hold her there, didn't do a lot of damage, didn't really try for many submissions, but she was able to maintain that position throughout the rest of the round, definitely took round one. And I think Emily sensed that she couldn't spend another round, and definitely another round or two, on her back with Vargas on top of her. So once again, came out aggressive, cracked Vargas again this time, however, was able to swing around and get a rear naked choke, tapping Vargas just 29 seconds into round two. And impressive performance by Emily. I think Bellator is starting to get some quality 125 female fighters, and I wouldn't be surprised if eventually we see a 125 title fight coming up. I think they've had quite a few girls that are starting to make some waves in this division, and I wouldn't be surprised. I would say by the end of the year, I think we'll see a Bellator flyweight title fight. Now, we are already supposed to have a featherweight female title fight for Bellator earlier this year, but Julia Budd got hurt, and Kunin fought an injury replacement. She lost. So now Julia Budd will probably, when she's able to return, so I don't know when that's going to be, but I got to imagine the women's featherweight title fight will be, that's the first one they have in line, so that should be sometime later this year. But I think this flyweight division is looking really good, and I think having two divisions that aren't in the UFC, obviously a great move for Bellator. Now, the 145 is not that deep, but I think 125, they can build a niche. As long as the UFC keeps not having that division, that's going to really help Bellator scoop up some of those girls who either are a little too small for bantamweight and a little too big for strawweight. So I think that division is going to be the true crown of their reemergence in women's mixed martial arts. The co-main event of the evening, Melvin Guillard against David Rickles. Rickles always, of course, the fan favorite there in Kansas with the big interest, the caveman there. But one thing about Rickles is you got to get him on early. He's definitely a grinder. He's definitely a guy that can wear on you both with his striking, his grappling. Definitely plays the long game. Not a very explosive guy, not a very heavy-handed guy. And Guillard, quite the opposite. He's definitely a guy that has made a career of ending fights early. And if Melvin was able to do that, was able to get in a quick start, it was going to do wonders for him. And that's really what he was able to do. And for Guillard, it really started with an elbow. They were kind of in a clinch. Rickles was kind of moving forward. Guillard was able to land a nice standing elbow. That started to rock Rickles, eventually dropped him. And Guillard followed up on the ground, chased him into guard, was landing a lot of punches, but most of them either getting blocked or not really landing solid. Then the strike that dropped him, the elbows, Guillard went back to those in ground and pound mode, just throwing vicious elbow after vicious elbow, cut Rickles open, and eventually Rob Hines had to stop this one 2-14 into the first round for Melvin's first win in Bellator. This is his third fight in this organization, and his first win in a while, because when he left the UFC, I believe that was on a loss, and only had just the one fight there, well, technically two fights in World Series of Fighting. So he has not won since July of 2014 when he knocked out JZ Cavalcante. So it's been nearly 2 years since Melvin Guillard has won a mixed martial arts bout. Does it against a solid guy in enemy territory there in David Rickles. Still think Melvin Guillard doesn't have much in the tank left, but he's still an exciting guy. He's still proved that he can knock people out. He's still proved that he has that power, especially at 155 pounds. And I don't think he's going to capture the Bellator 155 title, especially with Ben Henderson now dropping down to his natural weight class. And I think it's only a matter of time before we see Ben Henderson take on Michael Chandler. In the meantime, Michael Chandler probably is going to fight Josh Thompson. With Ben Henderson booking his fight against Bellator, And of course, Chandler was already supposed to fight Josh Thompson earlier this year in May in Thompson's backyard there in San Jose. I gotta imagine that's probably going to be the next fight. They could potentially make Chandler wait for the winner of Pitbull and Ben Henderson, but I think the Josh Thompson fight is a very solid fight. There's a chance Chandler, I mean, that was a quick first-round knockout he had there of Pitbull in St. Louis at Dynamite, so he's definitely ready to go, and I don't think the injuries should keep Chandler, or Thompson rather, away from Chandler too long, and I think that's the fight to make, and then you possibly either late this year, December, or early next year, January, you probably have the winner of Ben Henderson Pitbull against the winner of Michael Chandler and Josh Thompson. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they make Chandler wait, but I think Josh Thompson deserves, would be deserving of the shot. I think he was probably even more deserving than Pitbull when they fought for the vacant title. Chandler did at Dynamite. So we'll see what happens with that. But either way, the lightweight division, even with the loss of Will Brooks to the UFC, still very exciting for Bellator. Main event of the evening in the bantamweight division, another loaded division for Bellator. Joe Time Manglo, Baby Joe, taking on Darrion Caldwell. Caldwell could have arguably not taken this fight, could have fought Eduardo Dantes for the bantamweight title. Instead, went ahead and booked this fight. He was tired of kind of waiting for the conclusion of Galvo and Dantes. Of course, we all know Dantes dominated Marcus Galvo in their rematch a few weeks ago. And the weird thing about Darrion Caldwell, if he doesn't finish him in the first round, it's typically a decision. So, wasn't able to finish Joe in the first round, and didn't finish in the second round, but definitely was controlling this fight. Joe, a much smaller guy than Darrion Caldwell at this weight class, and obviously the wrestling credentials that Darrion Caldwell brings to the table, very few in any mixed martial arts organization are going to have somebody like a Darrion Caldwell. And entering the third round, Caldwell knew that if he got this fight to the ground, he could most likely possibly get a finish, but was already up 2 rounds to none. Just needed to not get caught. But that's what happened. I think he shot in a little too quick. He didn't really set up that takedown. Kind of just shot in right after they touched hands. Joe went for the guillotine. He went hard, caught it, and probably realized that was his only chance to get a victory would be to get a finish. And just squeezed as hard as he could and got Caldwell to tap just 9 seconds into the third round in a huge come-from-behind and upset victory by Time Manglo, who now finds himself probably with a title shot against Eduardo Dantes. And for Caldwell, it's just something simple. It was just maybe set up the takedown a little more. Just don't go rushing in. Regardless of how well you're doing in the fight, it just takes one little slip up like that, and next thing you know, you lost. And it's not something major that he has to correct or anything. I'm sure this is his first loss ever in mixed martial arts, and I don't know how far he went undefeated to end his collegiate wrestling career, but it's probably been a while since he's lost a martial arts competition. So he'll probably take some time, regroup, but he will be back. Like I said, he was dominating Time Manglo up until the point of the guillotine choke. I still think he is one of the best guys Bellator has on their roster. And this happens. You get caught, whether it's with a punch or submission. That's how this game works sometimes. And Caldwell's still very young, only 20 years old. This is only his 10th professional fight. So he will definitely be back. I think he maybe takes on a guy like Rafael Silva or possibly Marcus Galvo. Probably if he gets by one of those two guys, it's right back in the thick of things. And I wouldn't be surprised if early next year Caldwell will get that bantamweight title shot, or at the very least a rematch at Time Manglo. But Joe saw his opportunity, took it, and got the victory. Moving on real quickly, if you didn't know, which probably didn't, World Series of Fighting 32 will happen this coming weekend. Unfortunately, they picked the same day as UFC 201. I'm not really sure who schedules their fight, but that's, I don't know. I don't think that's a great idea. Anyways, it is actually a pretty good card for World Series of Fighting, which doesn't happen too often. They got 3 excellent fights. I'm sure a 4th will be added to the main card, but their top 3 fights, you got Kouros Fodor against Ben Fodor, And a battle of the Fodors there. This will be in Everett, Washington at the Xfinity Arena. Fodor is a native of Seattle, Washington, so he will definitely be the hometown guy. He's the superhero known as Phoenix Jones, 6-1 so far in his career. So far in World Series of Fighting 1-1, he did win his last fight with a leg scissor choke, pretty crazy, against Roberto Young. That was back at World Series of Fighting 23. So it's been a while since we've seen Ben Fodor in the World Series of Fighting Decagon. And Kouros Fodor has been around for a while. Even though he only has 15 professional fights, he's fought in a whole bunch of organizations. King of the Cage, he's fought in Strikeforce, he's fought in the UFC, he's fought in ONE FC, now World Series of Fighting. He's pretty much fought in every major organization. His last fight, however, was against Luis Firmino, and that was in World Series of Fighting 27. That was earlier this year where he lost a decision. So it's going to be an interesting fight. He's also a Washington native, training there with Mighty Mouse Johnson there at AMC Pancration. Not a huge guy for 155 pounds, listed at 5'9". He's also fought some of his career at 170. Fodor, the other Fodor, Ben Fodor, gotta realize what last name. He is a really bulky 155 pounder, but his conditioning is something that is a factor. Again, he's as being 6 foot, so that'll be something to look out for. It should be exciting with both guys being natives of Washington, and I think that's a solid fight. And always when Phoenix Jones fights, it's always usually pretty exciting. Then the co-main event of the evening will be for their featherweight championship, as Alexandre Almeida will rematch Lance Palmer, the man he beat to become the World Series of Fighting featherweight champion. And so far, I don't believe anyone has defended the featherweight championship since becoming the featherweight champion. Lance Palmer was the first featherweight champion. Then he lost to Georgie Karakhanyan. Then Karakhanyan lost to Rick Glenn. Then Lance Palmer beat Rick Glenn, and now Almeida beat Lance Palmer. And now they're doing this one again, and it was their last fight at World Series of Fighting 26. That was December of last year, with Almeida winning by unanimous decision after all 5 rounds. And Palmer had a tough time getting the inside on the very long and lanky Almeida, who for this weight class, you don't see too many guys fighting at 145 pounds that stand 5'11". Whereas you look at Lance Palmer, much like one of his alpha male teammates who fights there at 145 pounds, very similar kind of to Chad Mendez, a guy at 5'6", very strong wrestler coming out of Ohio State University, was an All-American there, and just couldn't get inside. When he was able to land a takedown, couldn't really do much. He was threatened by submissions, and standing up on the feet, Lance Palmer didn't show much in the way of striking either. Again, that trouble inside, he was really towards the end of those punches by Almeida, who I thought at that point in time no one had ever heard of, coming out of Brazil, had fought a lot in the Jungle Fight organization, one of the bigger organizations in Brazil. And, you know, not much was known about this guy. Obviously had a good record, 17-5 coming into that fight, and I think shocked a lot of people. And this time, I don't know if much will change really, because one thing you can't change is how tall you are and how big a reach you have. I mean, there's still going to be a 5-inch disadvantage in height for Lance Palmer. There's still going to be at least 5 or 6 inches, maybe more, in the reach department, and those are tough things to overcome. And those are, as much as you train a longer reach, as long as Almeida is able to not allow Lance Palmer in the inside and able to pop back up quickly and not stay too long off his back or threaten submissions to keep Palmer off bay, a guy who has never knocked out anyone in his career, just 6 of 10 wins by submission. So he has finished people, but has not knocked out anyone in 12 fights. I think that's something too. I think that helps the guy in Almeida not having to worry about power too much. And it's crazy that a guy like Lance Palmer, a guy from Alpha Male, a guy who's such a strong wrestler, has never knocked anyone out. That's kind of crazy when you actually go back and think about it. So I think it's going to be tough. I don't think Lance Palmer has to drop weight class or organization or anything. It just, I think Almeida's just a very difficult guy. He's just one of those weird guys that can get down to 145 pounds and knows how to use his length. And so Lance Palmer's just going to have to catch him or just do a lot more. He's going to have to do a lot more different in this fight to get a victory against Almeida. In the main event of the evening for the Bantamweight Championship at Bellator, arguably the best fighter in World Series of Fighting, Josh Hill will rematch Marlon Moraes for the second time, and arguably this has been Moraes' closest fight to date when he first took on Josh Hill back at World Series of Fighting 18 in February of 2015. Since losing to Moraes at that day in February, about, what was that, like 18 months ago, he's continued on winning 4 consecutive fights. Only one of those came in World Series of Fighting as he defeated Bekbalat Momedov at World Series of Fighting 26. However, he has won fights in organizations Global Warriors FC, RXF19, and also an organization called Fight Night Medicine had in April of this year. So he has won 4 fights, 3 of them coming outside of the organization. Josh Reddinghouse was probably the best guy he's fought in there, and I believe Reddinghouse has also spent some time in World Series of Fighting. So I think this is going to be a good fight, close, but man, I don't know. Moraes is an animal. I think Josh Hill can keep it close again, but I'm not sure what he can do to be better than Marlon Moraes. Marlon Moraes is just about good everywhere, and I don't know. I think it can go 5 rounds again. I mean, Hill's a tough guy, but man, he's gonna have to do something crazy because I feel like he just can't sit back and be at range, which was a lot of this fight the first time around, if memory serves me correctly. And you're just not gonna beat Marlon Moraes at kicking range. You got to be inside. You got to try to make it early. You got to try to pressure him. You got to try to take him down. You got to make him work his frame in ways he's not used to. But if you keep things at a comfortable range, you know, kind of kicking and trading, you're not going to beat this guy. And I'm not sure if Josh Hill can do that and can do it for 25 minutes because while Moraes maybe doesn't have the best conditioning, it's pretty good, and he's also a very hard guy to hit, so I think he's a hard guy to try to finish early or really damage. Anything can happen. It only takes 1 punch with 4-ounce glove, but good luck to Josh Hill because he's going to be in for possibly another long night taking on Marlon Moraes. Jim Graham here, host of Beyond the Cage. You can follow me on Twitter at Jim Graham. You can also check out Beyond the Cage on Facebook at facebook.com/BeyondTheCagePodcast. As I head into my recap of UFC on Fox 20 this past weekend from Chicago IL at the United Center, of course shown on Fox Broadcast Television. 4 fights were featured on the main card for UFC on Fox 20. Before I get to that real quickly, I want to give a brief look over the undercard. The Fight Pass fights I thought were pretty excellent, especially the bout between Jason Knight and Jim Ehlers. Boy, what a scrap that was. Definitely deserving of Fight of the Night honors as Jason Knight was able to get his first victory inside the octagon. Of course, his first fight, he took on Kawajiri on short notice. I believe that was late last year in December at that Ultimate Fighter finale. But definitely, I think, against the guy not as grappling heavy as Kawajiri, but still a good grappler in his own right in Jim Ehlers. We were able to see, to me, the real Jason Knight, a guy with really good striking, very aggressive, in your face. He was talking trash during the fight. You know, again, showed that guard a little bit, that active guard that he has. They mentioned, of course, with Alan Belcher training and coaching. So definitely a very fun fight. Jim Ehlers definitely was taken out of his element a little bit, turned into a brawl. I'm not sure if what he was expecting, but Jason Knight brought the fight right to him. I definitely think, as Joe Rogan alluded to during this fight, that Knight definitely took the first 2 rounds. Ehlers probably took the 3rd round with his ground control as Knight threw a incredible 245 strikes for a 15-minute fight. Is an incredible pace to just 110 thrown by Ehlers. Knight landed 95 of the 245. Not exactly a great clip, but the 95, that's almost as many landed as Ehlers thrown. So you could just tell he was just being super aggressive. And I'm not sure if Ehlers is ready for that type of output from Jason Knight. And definitely deserving of the fight night. A little surprised on the split decision, but judges got it right, and Jason Knight was able to get the victory. Alex Oliveira, the Brazilian cowboy, gets a win over the very tough kind of karate and taekwondo stylist in James Mutazari. Moving to the prelims that were actually also shown on Fox before the main card. Michael Prazeres with a nice win over J.C. Cottrell. Kamaru Usman with another very dominant performance using his wrestling just to a T, just perfect technique, was able to take Yakovlev completely out of his element, and Yakovlev never really stood a chance against the Nigerian Usman, who gets another victory inside the octagon. Darren Elkins against Pepe I thought was also a very fun fight, probably would have been my second choice for fight of the night. Pepe was going to have a tough time keeping Elkins off of him. A couple times even Pepe, I think, accepted guard, dropped guard, and I think they mentioned his corner was telling him to stop that. This is a guy that you don't want to drop guard against because that's his game plan, is to be on top, wear you down with damage inside your guard. This is what he calls Darren the Damage Elkins. That's where he likes to do his work. So accepting that position is not good. You're basically allowing Elkins to be in his enemy. And for Pepe, yeah, he has good submissions. He's crazy. He does things off his back, but the longer you get in those positions and the longer you fail in them and the longer this fight wears on with Elkins getting more and more time on top of you, this is not a good place to be. That's Darren Elkins' MO. Striking-wise, yeah, Pepe's definitely the better striker. Hit him a few times, definitely tagged him a few times, but the longer that Elkins was able to keep this fight on top, which he did, I mean, 5 of 6 on his takedowns, not to mention the couple times that Pepe pulled guard, and you end up with a striking clip of 206 to 67. It's just, that's a pretty place to do. So for Pepe, I think he was a little too confident in his ability off the back, and that's something that he's going to have to learn moving forward in his career. There's just some guys, no matter how confident you are in your abilities, that they're just going to be tough to submit, and you just don't want them on top of you. And Darren Elkins is one of those guys. Also, to end the prelim part of the card, Eddie Wineland. He's been out of action for a while from his loss to Brian Caraway, which is actually at last year's Chicago card in July. Took some time off, regrouped, taking on another tough guy in Frankie Saenz, who had a very good fight against Uriah Faber, despite losing. That was earlier this year. Wineland just really, I thought, put it to him, was able to keep the fight standing, and anytime it's standing, Eddie Wineland has a chance to crack you. And I thought the first 2 rounds was close, probably would have had it 1-1. Definitely, I probably would have gave Wineland the first round, definitely cracked Saenz hard, didn't get the finish. Round 2, I thought Saenz striked a little better. I thought was mixing up the combinations a little more close. You could have gave it either way, whether you have it 1-0 or 2-0 Wineland or 1-1. Eddie Wineland made that irrelevant in the 3rd round as he was able to land one of those huge right hands that he is capable of. And unlike in the 1st round, he was able to pounce on Saenz and get the finish in the 3rd round, officially at 154 in the 3rd round. And good win for Eddie. Again, he hasn't won in a while inside the octagon. He had, of course, the jaw injury following his loss to Johnny Eduardo. That was back in 2014. So this is his first win since January of 2014, so nearly 18 months since Wineland's last victory, and that was Henderson versus Thompson UFC on Fox in January of 2014. So been a long time. Eddie's been around for a long time in the WEC and the UFC. 32 years old, gets his 13th career knockout victory, and if he can fight like that, you know, he's definitely a top 10 bantamweight. I mean, he's a huge guy for this division. We've had him on the show before. He's a nice guy. You know, he's a guy he's a working man's guy. You know, he's working to go in there and fight. You know, he still works a regular job and trains. And if he can fight like this, he can be a force to be reckoned with. But can't take, you know, he's only fought 3 times in 2 years. If he wants to get towards the top, he's going to have to be a lot more active. And beating a top 15 guy like Frankie Saenz is a step in the right direction for Eddie Wineland, who I think still could possibly make another title run in this division. Getting to the main card, UFC on Fox 20. It featured 4 fights. The first fight in the female strawweight division, as Feliz made her return over a year layoff for Feliz, taking on one of the young upstarts in the division, and Kylan Karan, as they were calling her, not Curran. All of a sudden now, after 3 fights in the UFC, it's Karan. It's always been Kylan. But Kylan against Feliz, Not too surprised. I did pick Karan. I thought that she would be able to employ a similar strategy to Paige Van Zandt. Of course, that was Feliz's last fight. But Feliz is definitely tricky on the ground. I thought that could be something because Karan got caught in an armbar in one of her UFC losses against Alex Chambers, a fight that she was dominating. So definitely thought that was a possibility. But after this long layoff, where was her head going to be at? Where was her physical condition going to be at? And how was she going to perform on a big stage like that, Fox, hometown crowd, and everything like that? But she passed with flying colors, was able to get the fight to where she wanted it to be, was able to get a takedown, switched around quick in transition to grab the back, and then sunk in the choke and got the tap just 159 into the first round. And a pretty much flawless performance by Feliz in her first win since December of 2014, and that was on the Ultimate Fighter finale. That was her first ever UFC fight. So if Feliz can fight like that, she's going to have a future in this division. Not to say she never had a future, but the Paige Van Zandt fight, I think, was definitely demoralizing, and also there was a point in time, there was that, she had to regroup from that, and also she had to really regroup from her loss to Tecia Torres back to Invicta. So she is definitely a fighter that, definitely has to have the mental part right, because physically she is there with anyone in this division. And getting a win like this, hometown crowd, quick victory over a young up-and-comer like Karan, I think can do wonders for her confidence. And if she can keep up that, mental positivity, she can fight with some of the best in this division. She really can. So I'm assuming she'll probably fight a top 15 girl for her next fight. She's already fought Van Zandt. She has fought Torres and Invicta. Now Karan. I think a Marina Moroz, would be a solid competitor. I don't know if they would do a Tecia rematch. Michelle Waterson has a fight already booked. I thought that would have been a pretty good matchup. I kind of may have to just wait and see for Feliz here. Obviously, she probably wouldn't fight her best friend there in Carla Esparza. Maybe a matchup with Jessica Penne, even though Penne is coming off a loss. I still think that would be a good fight. So there are definitely options out there for Harrigan. I would assume, because of the long layoff and the quick victory, that she'll probably want to get back in there sooner rather than later. Next fight of the evening, heavyweight division, Francis Ngannou, not Ngannou, I was calling him Ngannou, but the N is silent, so Francis Ngannou against Bohan Mihalovic, and went pretty much how I thought it was going to be. A couple of punches landed there by Francis, and saw Mihalovic crack down the canvas, and that was pretty much it. I mean, this dude Ngannou is an absolute monster. I mean, 6'4", a solid 250, 260 pound guy. He's a beast. I mean, he's definitely deserving of a step up in competition. I know after his win over Roy Nelson, Derek Lewis wanted to fight Roy Nelson again, but I think a Derek Lewis-Ngannou matchup would be incredible. I think that would be a very, very good fight to make next. I think that's a good step up in competition for Ngannou. And for Lewis, again, it was not the greatest performance. Obviously, he didn't get a knockout victory. He was kind of sloppy. Obviously, Roy Nelson, that wasn't his best performance. So I think that's a very solid fight to make up, and definitely I think one that a lot of people would be interested in, and definitely a fight that could be a fight of the night, knockout of the night type of performance by either gentleman. Co-main events of the evening, Edson Barboza against Gilbert Melendez. First fight for Melendez since testing positive for performance-enhancing drugs, and obviously since his loss to Eddie Alvarez back in Mexico last year, UFC 188, I believe that was. And for Melendez, I thought the first round, did pretty good. You could have made a case that he won that round. I thought it was close. I thought Melendez definitely cracked him a few times, caught up with the speed. And one thing I noticed in round one, I didn't see Barboza throw a lot of kicks in the first round. Then in round two, that's when the kick came, and you really start to see Barboza. Obviously, the leg kicks are what he's known for, but he was mixing them up to the body as well, and I think slowed down Melendez. And I think Melendez, after that first round of maybe adrenaline, kind of went back down. Again, this is his first fight in a while. He's now 34 years old. Definitely not as quick as he used to be. I think you saw Melendez start to slow down a little bit. Barboza started to kind of pick up the pace a little bit, kind of go to his bread and butter there with the kicks. And in round 3, Melendez, who I think was a better boxer during this matchup, that was taken out of the equation because of the kicks. He could not move anymore off that front leg to get into boxing range to use what I thought was superior boxing skills, not that night and probably overall. And he couldn't do that, couldn't take the fight to the ground where he was 0 for 5 in takedowns. Again, you can't plan on that front leg to shoot in for a double or a single. And Barboza just kind of dismantled him with those kicks. And El Nido maybe not as fast as he once was. And again, the long layoff, I think, kind of hurt Melendez in this case. And Barboza, to me, was able to definitely take those 2 rounds and secure a 29-28 victory, or possibly a 30-27 as 2 judges have it. I can't really disagree too much with that. But very good performance for Edson Barboza. His 3rd straight, I thought, excellent performance in a row, even though one of those was a loss to Tony Ferguson. After the fight, he mentioned a rematch with Ferguson, obviously Khabib and the champion who just lost, and Rafael Dos Anjos. I'm imagining we're going to see Tony Ferguson against Eddie Alvarez. I think that's the fight to make. Barboza against Dos Anjos or Khabib is a title eliminator, or a guy who knows what's going to happen after his matchup with Conor McGregor in August, that being Nate Diaz. If he beats Conor McGregor again, that's a guy that is instantly right back in the thick of things at 155 pounds if he chooses to fight back at that weight class. And he could easily either get a title shot or be 1 fight away from fighting for a UFC title again. So I would say those are probably his next 3 opponents. It's either going to be Dos Anjos, Khabib, or Nate Diaz. I think those are his options because I think Ferguson gets the shot. I would be very surprised if Ferguson doesn't get the shot. If he doesn't, we possibly see an Edson Ferguson rematch. I know Ferguson is obviously adamant about fighting Khabib, but any way you really slice it, Edson Barboza is, I think, 1 fight away from a title shot. He's going to take on one of those top guys, and he's been fantastic as of late, now beating a former Strikeforce champion and a former UFC champion. Main event of the evening in the women's bantamweight division is former UFC bantamweight champion Holly Holm took on Valentina Shevchenko. What a performance by Shevchenko, a girl who was giving up about 3 to 4 inches in height, and I think was giving up, let's see here, officially only 2 inches in reach, but 3 inches in height. Definitely was at a disadvantage in those categories. And despite getting a little bit cracked there in the first round, a little bit of a close moment there, that was about the biggest opening Holly Holm had in this moment, in this fight, was that first round. After that, I think Shevchenko really took over. You make a case she swept all 4 rounds after that. I think I maybe would have scored round 4 9-9. Because I didn't think a lot happened. There really wasn't nothing significant done in that round. Officially, Shevchenko outstruck Holm 21-9 in that 4th round, but was 0 for 2 on her takedowns. So I guess if you have to give it to somebody, you give it to Shevchenko. So on my scorecards, I would have had it 48-46, but it's rather irrelevant because I had Shevchenko taking 2, 3, and 5, even if I would have scored round 4 9-9. And I don't think I've ever seen someone with a height disadvantage and a reach disadvantage control the range of a fight so masterfully. You don't typically see that. And it's crazy to think that she was the shorter and less rangier fighter, because the way she was controlling her range, it makes you think like she always has that advantage, which in the UFC at 135 pounds, she almost always will have that as a disadvantage. And she was able to move in and out, avoid getting hit, counter great. And Holm, I think 2 things. One, maybe a little more, they mentioned that, she's kind of a counter striker too. I think to an extent she is, but I think maybe more output, I think, could have helped. 2, she doesn't have much to fall back on if the striking isn't going her way. She's not a necessarily great grappler, submission artist up against the clinch with knees. She doesn't have a lot to throw back on other than kind of boxing and kickboxing. So there wasn't really a plan B for Holly Holm, whereas I think Shevchenko is definitely the more well-rounded fighter. I think she has the better grappling skills of the two. That showed in brief instances, especially in round 3, where she held Holm down for a good portion of that round. And I think 3 is fighting a southpaw. As weird as that is for Holm being a southpaw, not too many southpaws fight other southpaws. So it's a weird thing adjusting for someone fighting the same stance as you. Orthodox guys, it happens all the time, and Orthodox gals. But fighting a southpaw is a weird thing for a southpaw because you don't see it too many times. So I mean, she's been around boxing and kickboxing and MMA for a very long time now, and maybe that wasn't a factor, but I think that's something at least to consider because it's not something she has seen a lot and probably hasn't really seen it in MMA, and it's been a while since she probably hadn't seen the boxing and kickboxing. And also she probably, I don't think, was expecting the speed and her ability to control the range so well. I think that no matter how much you watch that on tape, I think it's something that is very hard to prepare for, someone being able to just stay out of your range while being shorter than you. It's a weird thing, and Shevchenko did it masterfully. And I think in the process may have earned herself a shot at the UFC title. Of course, her fight against Amanda Nunes earlier this year was very close. Nunes went on to fight for the title after beating Shevchenko. So you can make a case Shevchenko gets a shot at the title. Juliana Pena's lurking there as well. I think Shevchenko defeating Holly Holm in a 5-round fight, main event, is more impressive to me than when Juliana Pena defeated Kat Zingano in a 3-round fight. I think it is. I think based on those two performances, I say Shevchenko. Not on that, Juliana Pena was ranked the higher fighter against Kat Zingano. Juliana Pena, I guess, you could say, was expected to win. Shevchenko, however, was not. Originally coming into this matchup, it was 1 versus 9. With everything that happened with 200, ended up being number 2 versus number 7. So it closed the gap closer as we got to fight week. But still, Holly Holm, former champion, has been in the main event before and has fought, in that huge stadium show in Australia. Did the unthinkable, beat Ronda Rousey. So you knew she was going to mentally be prepared to fight someone like Shevchenko, and couldn't get it done. So I think Shevchenko, also adding how close her fight was to Amanda Nunes, and that was a 3-round fight. It would be interesting to see how that fight would have played out if it was 5 rounds. We may get that opportunity. I think Nunes possibly broke her hand, I think they mentioned, after the fight, so she may be out longer than expected. So there could be a situation where Pena fights Shevchenko for a number 1 contender spot to get the title shot, which I'm not opposed to. And then I think you get Miesha Tate, Holly Holm too. I think that's the fight to make for Holly Holm. Give her a chance to get that loss back, and you give Miesha Tate a chance to recover against a girl that, again, close fight. I think she was losing the fight heading into that 5th round, so I think that would be a great rematch. And to me, that could very easily main event FS1 or even a Fox card later this year. So I think that's what we're looking at. It really depends how long Nunes will be out, what the UFC wants to promote. The thing that may hurt Shevchenko is the fact that that Nunes fight didn't really happen that long ago. So I don't know if they're willing to do a rematch that close to the original. Sometimes they are, but sometimes they aren't. Juliana Pena's, former Ultimate Fighter winner and whatnot. So I don't know. We'll see. If Pena gets it next, and Shevchenko has to take another fight, which probably would be the case, it's really interesting to see who she would take on them, because she could take on Tate, possibly, but I said I like the Holm-Tate matchup better. Sarah McMahon is coming off a win over Jessica Ai. Jessica Ai is now booked with the fight against Betchkea. Raquel Pennington, I think, would be an interesting name, but I think Pennington has a fight coming up in Salt Lake City, if I'm not mistaken. So I don't know. The Sarah McMahon fight would be good because it is a grappling-heavy fighter. But I don't know if Sarah McMahon, despite the win over I, is a little lower in the rankings. I don't know. We'll see how it all plays out, but it definitely now really shakes up the top half of this women's bantamweight division. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another edition of Beyond the Cage. I'm your host, Jim Graham, and joining me today on the line, we have a special guest. He will be fighting Jake Ellenberger on the main card of UFC 201 on pay-per-view Saturday, July 30th. He is the immortal Matt Brown. And Matt, thanks for coming back on Beyond the Cage.
Thank you very much, man. Thanks for having me.
I want to get to your last fight here, Matt, just a minute. And looking, besides the fight itself, you had altercations with fans during your walkout. There was the situation at the hotel with a former jiu-jitsu coach that decided to throw a cheap shot your way. Was that arguably the worst experience you've ever had just being a fighter with anything and not doing inside the ring?
I guess it depends on what you consider worse, because really it wasn't a bad experience. I mean, it was memorable, and I kind of enjoyed it. It kind of kept things loose and kept things going. So yeah, it didn't really bother me too much. But I guess if you consider all that to be bad stuff, then yeah, it was definitely the worst experience. But it just wasn't really that bad for me, I didn't think.
Now, have you heard any update about this Rodrigo body who was trying to throw a cheap shot your way? Is as far as you know, that's just being handled down there in Brazil?
No updates. I haven't really heard any updates, so yeah, it's whatever.
Now, looking at the actual fight there against Damian Maia, did he do anything that was a surprise to you at all in that fight?
No, nothing at all. That's kind of the most disappointing part is he did exactly what I knew he was going to do. I mean, that's Damon. He's not really a surprising guy. He tells you what he's going to try to do, and he was able to do it, which was unfortunate. But we'll be right back this Saturday.
Now, of course, that fight was just over 2 months ago. Is the reason for the quick turnaround just trying to get that taste of that loss out of your mouth?
I guess. I mean, I just came out healthy, and I just called Joe Silva and said, "Hey, man, let's get back in there ASAP." I mean, I'm healthy and in shape, so let's just keep the ball rolling. Let's not get out of shape and have to come back and do it all again. I just want to stay, and I really love fighting. I enjoy fighting, and the point that I'm at in my career, the age and the wear and tear, when I'm healthy, I got to take advantage of that because there's going to be a lot of times where I'm not able to compete because I'm not healthy.
Now, you had one of your teammates there in TJ Dillashaw fight on UFC 200, so I was wondering, what did you think about UFC 200 overall, and then specifically, how did you think TJ did on that night?
I thought TJ did great, and I look forward to seeing him get another title shot again against Kouros, and I think he'll beat him like I think he beat him the first time. The entire show, UFC 200, I actually didn't get to watch it very closely because I was doing a signing at a Hooters and, was doing autographs and pictures the whole night. So it didn't seem like there was any major surprises throughout the show, but so I just didn't get to watch it that closely, though.
Now, of course, the main event of UFC 201, I'm sure you're going to have your eye on, considering it's for your division's title, the welterweight championship. How do you think Robbie Lawler and Tyron Woodley is going to play out, Matt?
I got Lawler winning the fight, probably in the later rounds.
Now, looking at your fight, of course, you're taking on Jake Ellenberger, much like yourself. He's been in the UFC for quite a few years. Is it crazy to think that you two have never crossed paths before?
I don't know. There's a lot of guys I haven't crossed paths with yet, but, here we are now, doing it now, so I'm ready for it.
looking at his skill set, obviously he's known for his wrestling. He has a really nasty right hand with a lot of power behind it, has put a lot of guys away with that. Also is prone to be a little wild at times as well. What are you expecting from Jake Ellenberger come Saturday night?
Yeah, I think you pretty much hit it on the head. I mean, he's probably going to throw big right hands and big hooks and probably looking for a knockout. He may try to wrestle me. I don't really know, but I'm not really coming in with any specific expectations. I'm coming in with the expectations of myself performing at my peak levels and dominating this fight regardless of what situations we're in during the fight.
Now, he has had problems with his conditioning in the past, and do you feel that if you can get this fight into the third round, that it'll be a big advantage for you?
Yeah, I got to think that, if we get this into the third round, it's going to be to my advantage. So, but, hopefully I can knock him out in the first round, and then you got to worry about it in the third rounds. But we'll see what happens, man. I'm prepared for whatever. I'm prepared for anything.
Now, for this camp, because of the quick turnaround you had from 198, do you feel as though you've kind of been in one, real long camp as opposed to two separate camps?
Yeah, that's exactly it. I do. I feel like it's just been one really long camp because I had a surgery last year, and so coming off surgery, had a lot of weight to get off, and you had to get my skill set back and cardio back and all these things. So I need it worked out good, and now I feel like I'm in the just one long camp. You hit it right on the head.
All right, Matt, I'll get you out of here with this. Of course, a lot of fans are excited for your matchup here against Jake Ellenberger. Do you have any predictions for what's going to happen Saturday night inside the Octagon?
I predict that I will be at my peak levels, and I will be performing great on Saturday night. With respect to what Jake Ellenberger is going to do, I have no idea. Don't really care.
He is the Immortal, Matt Brown. You can follow him on Twitter and Instagram at I am the Immortal. And Matt, thanks again for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. I look forward to your fight on Saturday night.
Right on. Thanks for having me, bro.
Once again, that was the Immortal Matt Brown right here on Beyond the Cage. UFC 201 will be on pay-per-view this Saturday night from Atlanta, Georgia. 10 in the East, 7 on the West Coast. 5 fights will be shown on the pay-per-view main card, starting first in the flyweight division, as Ian McCall will take on Justin Scoggins. Looking at Ian McCall, it's been a while since he has fought in the UFC, and despite not having fought since losing to John Lineker back in January of 2015, nearly 18 months ago, he is still ranked number 5 in this division. So far, since joining the UFC from the WEC, has only won 2 fights. He is 2-3 with a draw. That draw being that crazy night there in Australia against Demetrius Mighty Mouse Johnson in their 4-man tournament to determine the first ever flyweight champion. He has not won a fight since July of 2014 when he defeated Brad Pickett. So it's been nearly 2 years since Ian McCall has won. And Justin Scoggins is a very good prospect here in this division. A very good striker is Scoggins. He, I thought, put that on display nicely and showed his improved takedown defense, defeating the very tough Ray Borg back in February of this year after dropping 2 fights. He came into the organization winning his first 2 fights, defeating Will Campazano and Richie Vasilek. Then he ran into some very tough guys. Dustin Ortiz, a very grappling-heavy guy, probably the first real true grappler he has faced so far in this decision. Lost, but made it a tough fight. John Moraga, one of the top guys in this division, following that loss. Then he defeated Josh Sampo, who was a solid guy. And then I think defeating Ray Borg the way he did, I think was a big step, because like I said, he's known more for a striker. Being on his back is kind of like his Achilles heel a little bit. And Ian McCall does have some wrestling ability, but I would say is more known for his striking. And I think Scoggins has improved enough that I think he can keep the fight standing. And I think it's a little more of a 50-50 fight, and maybe even a little more towards Scoggins, who I think will be a little taller fighter, as he's listed as 5'7" to just 5'5" for Uncle Creepy, 64-inch reach for McCall, 66 for Scoggins. So I think striking, maybe you can even give a little bit of an edge there to Scoggins. Also add in the fact it's been so long since Uncle Creepy has fought, and not to mention that loss against Lineker back in January 2015. That was his first fight in quite a while. His last victory, as I mentioned, July of 2014. So he's really only fought once in 2 years. If you really look at it, that's a long time off in the sport against the guy who, you know, is a lot younger, maybe a little quicker in the new blood of the division. He's hungry. And a win over McCall really shoots up Scoggins in the rankings. He's listed as 13. McCall's still at 5 again, despite only having lost or fought once in 2 years. And if this was 2 years ago, I think Ian McCall definitely beats Justin Scoggins. I think he would have been a more well-known fighter and definitely had fought the better competition. But now, I think this is going to be a breakout fight for Justin Scoggins. I really do. I think if Uncle Creepy had a fight maybe against a little lesser guy to get kind of his feet back under him a little bit, I could maybe see McCall winning this a lot easier. But I think this is Scoggins' time. I think that his stand-up, his reach will be tough for Ian McCall to battle, and I think that long layoff only helps Justin Scoggins. Next fight of the evening in the bantamweight division, Francisco Rivera against Eric Perez. Rivera always known for being a very aggressive guy. He always comes to do battle in the octagon. Always likes to be in your face. He likes to push the pace. He does not allow you to breathe with his striking. His last fight, I thought, won against Brad Pickett. However, the judges went the other way and gave the fight to Brad Pickett. 2 losses in a row for Rivera since having a great performance in knockout over Bruce Leroy back in June of 2015. And Eric Perez definitely at one time was the hot prospect here in the bantamweight division. Has kind of cooled off as of late, as he has gone 1-1 in his last 2 fights. And it's been a while since he's fought. Has not fought since the fight night in Monterrey, Mexico, in his home country, November 21st, 2015. So it's been a while since we've seen Perez, and only fought once in 2014, once in 2015, and this so far has been his only fight for 2016. So I don't know if that's by design or he has been getting banged up, but it's definitely interesting for a guy that had fought twice for the UFC in 2013, and I believe for the UFC had fought 3 times in 2012, has definitely slowed down a little bit, but still young at 26 years old. I think striking-wise, I would say Perez is probably the better technical striker, but Rivera is one of these guys that, again, he's very aggressive. He comes right at you, and those sometimes can be hard guys to defend against because, you know, when you're in the gym, you know, you don't want to maybe get hurt. You maybe don't want to go as hard and wear yourself out and overtrain. So this is a hard guy to battle against. And Perez, I would say, is more a methodical striker. Definitely likes to kind of set things up, throw combinations, cut angles, and I think kind of wears you down and is more combination heavy and you know, a little more output, not necessarily a one-shot knockout guy like Rivera. So I think if this goes into the 2nd and 3rd round, I give Perez the advantage. I'd also say maybe Perez is a little more well-rounded. But Rivera, again, Rivera's going to push this pace, and if Perez can't weather that early storm, he's going to find himself on the canvas, knocked out cold there in Atlanta. Possibly a loser goes home match as Jake Ellenberger takes on Matt Brown in the welterweight division. Both guys have kind of fallen on tough times here inside the octagon. Of course, Jake Ellenberger has only won, I think, one fight in his last 6. Let's see if I got that correct. Well, if he, yeah, that is correct. In his last 6 fights, he's only won once, and that was defeating the now kind of washed up Josh Koscheck at UFC 184. That was February 2015. And since really, climbing up the ladder in this division, defeating the likes of Diego Sanchez, Jake Shield, Mike Pyle, John Howard, Jay Haran, Nate Marquardt. He's fallen on tough times. It all started really with the Roy McDonald fight back in July of 2013. While he's losing to top guys, he's still losing to him. I mean, he's lost to Roy McDonald. He lost to Robbie Lawler. He lost to Calvin Gastelum. He lost to Stephen Thompson. He lost to Tarek Saffiedine. And if he loses again to Matt Brown, 1-6 in your last 7 fights, you have 1 win in between 2 fight losing streaks. I don't care who you're taking on. You typically don't stick around. I'm surprised he stuck around this long. But definitely something has been different with Jake Ellenberger in his last 6 fights as opposed to the previous 6 fights, and even beyond that, since entering the UFC in 2009. So for Ellenberger, I think he has to get this fight to the ground and be on top. Now, Matt Brown does have an aggressive guard, can possibly submit Jake Ellenberger, but Ellenberger on top, damage, is the way he has to neutralize this. Standing up at range and allowing Matt Brown to kind of come at you with his punches and bunches style, his very aggressive nature. Yeah, Ellenberger can catch a punch, possibly knock out Matt Brown, but Matt Brown's a very tough guy. I mean, he went 5 rounds with Robbie Lawler, didn't get knocked out. I mean, he's fought some of the best guys in this division and hasn't got finished. So this is going to be a tough guy to try to finish with 1 punch. So for Ellenberger, he has to be able to get inside, block punches, get the takedown, and stay active. You kind of have to meet Matt Brown at his own game. I don't think he can do. He has to kind of emulate what Johnny Hendricks did. You got to take him down, and you got not allow him to use that punches and bunches strategy on you. You got to take him out of that opportunity. For Matt Brown, again, he's a guy who I think also kind of has his back against the wall. Since having that huge winning streak, which I believe was like 7 in a row at one point, he's fallen at tough times as he's lost 3 out of his last 4 fights. Again, has lost to top guys, Robbie Lawler, Johnny Hendricks, and Damian Maia. But losing to Jake Ellenberger would have him lose 4 out of his last 5. And again, a guy that's kind of been on tough times in Ellenberger. That loss looks, I think, worse than it would have been a couple of years ago. So I think a lot is riding on the line for both these guys, and both need to have a solid performance to just stick around in the UFC. Even if they don't win, an exciting fight could keep them around. So it's do or die for these guys. I think if Matt Brown can keep the fight standing or threaten with submissions off his back, I think he can win. But if Ellenberger is able to get inside, able to combat that pressure with clinch work and being on top and landing damage, because you got to do work against Matt Brown. You can't just sit there on top and ride out a round. He's not going to allow you to do that. So if he can counter with effective striking from the top, he can win. But I'm really looking forward to this fight. I think this is an exciting fight. And anytime I feel guys' backs are against the wall, you can maybe usually see something crazy, and it should make for an entertaining fight. Co-main event of the evening in the women's strawweight division, as Carolina Kowalkiewicz will take on Rose Namajunas. Carolina just so far 2-0 in the UFC, defeated Heather Jo Clark in her last fight earlier this year in the Netherlands. Also has a victory over Randa Marcos, who is a top 15 strawweight as well. Rose Namajunas, since losing the inaugural strawweight title fight, has been nothing short of fantastic, winning 3 fights in a row, including 2 finishes, submitting Angela Hill, the now Invicta strawweight champion, defeating Paige Van Zandt in a main event, and then having a very close fight, an exciting fight, in a rematch against Tecia Torres back in April this year, getting one back on Tecia as they now stand 1-1 against her. And I thought a win over Tecia would have been enough to get a title shot, but with the whole thing with the Ultimate Fighter and Joanna and Claudia not fighting until July, kind of opened the possibility of Rose having to take another fight. And it seemed like Rose, as well as the UFC brass, seemed as though they wanted Rose to have another fight before getting another chance at becoming the UFC strawweight champion, which I guess I can't argue too much, but I just thought Rose beating Tisha was a perfect #1 contender. Anyways, it now looks as though this is the #1 contender. After the win over Heather Jo Clark, Carolina has shot up to #5 in the rankings, #3 for Rose. Striking-wise, Carolina is definitely the better overall striker, but I think a little more power is possessed by Rose and is a little taller. They have the reach both listed exactly the same at 65 inches. But I would say Rose may be a little more aggressive, a little more prone to maybe throwing some wild strikes, and that could catch somebody who's a little more straightforward and combo heavy and punches and bunches heavy like Carolina. Grappling-wise, Carolina definitely has some solid takedown defense. I think she'll be tough for Rose to get down, but Rose, I think, has improved in her overall takedown game and is really good in scrambles. I think scrambles up against the clinch, and any weird striking exchanges, Rose could duck down, grab a leg, grab an arm, and definitely her submissions, and the majority of her victories coming by submission, as I believe she has 4 submission victories to her credit. Definitely off her back or on top. I think that's the most dangerous area. And I think if Carolina can keep this fight standing, that's where she's going to have her best chance. If Rose gets this thing to the ground, even off her back, she's still very dangerous and definitely could submit Carolina. And I think the winner of this fight absolutely gets a title shot, and it should be intriguing. You know, kind of have the wild, more aggressive style of Rose Namajunas against the very crisp kickboxing skills of Carolina Kowalkiewicz. Main event of the evening, Robbie Lawler against Tyron Woodley. Boy, I don't know if you have 2 more powerful guys in this division. Arguably, the 2 heaviest hitters are meeting here in the main event for the UFC Welterweight Championship. And if it stays standing, I think Robbie Lawler is the better overall striker. He's going to be a little taller, listed at 2 inches taller. The reach is going to be the same, but the punches that Lawler possesses, I think he has better kicks. Woodley has at times looked poor, especially with his footwork. He's been kind of, especially in the Gastelum fight and in the Rory McDonald fight, hasn't learned to kind of combat the angles, what to do when being pressured up against the cage, and if he's not able to get a takedown. So I think those areas help Robbie Lawler. I think Robbie Lawler has better skills. Now, I don't know if he could exactly, I don't think he has quite the footwork of Rory McDonald, despite beating him twice. He's not that type of fighter. He could do that, but that's not usually how he works. He doesn't really pressure people with footwork and then land strikes. He usually pressures people with strikes, then maybe gets them up the cage. He works a little differently. So that could help Woodley, again, who has been susceptible to guys with good footwork. Now, Lawler does have great takedown defense, but I got to believe eventually at some point Woodley will be able to get a takedown against Robbie Lawler. I think it's going to be hard for Lawler for a 25-minute fight to keep Woodley off of him completely. I think Woodley's too strong of a wrestler to allow that to happen. Now, that doesn't mean that Robbie Lawler can't win this fight. I mean, if Woodley ends up going like 2 for 10 in takedowns, Robbie Lawler did his job. It's about not letting Woodley get sustained top control. Because Robbie Lawler's not, I mean, I think he has 1 or 2 submission victories. He's not going to submit Tyron Woodley, I don't think, especially from bottom. And when Woodley's on top, that's where he's at his best. So that's really Robbie Lawler's key, is keep this thing standing. It definitely bodes well for him, but he's been in a lot of wars, especially since becoming a UFC champion, especially since coming back to the UFC and moving at 170. And Woodley is a guy that can end your night with one punch. I think of the guys Robbie Lawler has fought so far in the UFC, I think this is the most dangerous guy power-wise that he has faced. I mean, Condit, yeah, he knocks you out, but again, that's punches and bunches, much like Matt Brown. Johnny Hendricks has 1 shot, but I think with the weight issues that Hendricks has, and those being 5-round fights, we all know he's talked about, fighting at 70% against GSP or whatever. I think Woodley's a different animal, and I think that power is maybe even more prevalent than Johnny Hendricks. And then look at, Bobby Volker, Josh Koscheck at the time, definitely not as powerful. So as he want, or as good as he once was. So I think this may be the heaviest hitter, and I think while Robbie has a tough chin, he has been knocked out, and I think Woodley can do it. I think it's an interesting fight. I'm very excited for it. But again, the key for Lawler is to keep it standing, and for Woodley, look for those takedown opportunities. But you can't go in haphazard with a takedown against Robbie Lawler because he's good in that category and he can make you pay with counters. Let's get to my picks here for UFC 201 from Atlanta, Georgia on pay-per-view Saturday, July 30th. First fight of the evening, flyweight division, Justin Scoggins against Ian McCall. I think Ian McCall, probably a little better wrestler, a little better top control, can win the fight if he can get this to the ground. However, I think Scoggins has really improved in his takedown defense. I really like the way he performed against Ray Borg, not to mention the long layoff for Ian McCall. I'm going to take Justin Scoggins here to win this one. Francisco Rivera against Eric Perez. I think Eric Perez will have trouble dealing with that forward pressure and that aggressive nature that is Francisco Rivera. And Eric Perez, a more methodical guy, I think possibly could weather the storm and win this fight, but I think Rivera also, I think he's hungry. I think that last loss left a bad taste in his mouth. I think Eric Perez, he may have to pay for Rivera's last fight shortcoming, so I'm going to take Francisco Rivera in this one. Matt Brown against Jake Ellenberger. Jake Ellenberger definitely still a very powerful guy in this division, but I think he's going to have a tough time trying to counter the forward movement of Matt Brown, the punches and bunches, and when he gets to the ground, Ellenberger can win this fight, but he has to be aggressive, and I think Matt Brown is just the better conditioned fighter, and I think has more tools to win this fight than Jake Ellenberger, so I'm going to go with Matt Brown to win this one. Also, Rose Namajunas here against Karolina Kowalczyk, possibly a title eliminator fight. I think Carolina is the better striker. She definitely has the better combinations, but I think Rose has the better power. She's more unpredictable, and I think that submission game is something that is a real threat. I think that may be something that would be hard for Carolina to combat because I don't think she's ever faced a grappler quite like Rose Namajunas. So I'm going to take Rose Namajunas to win this one. Tyron Woodley against Robbie Lawler. Well, I think Woodley has a chance, definitely with his power and athleticism. I think he's going to have a tough time taking this fight to the ground. And also, he's only been, I think, into the fourth round once. That was against Nate Marquardt for the welterweight title back in Strikeforce. So Robbie Lawler is used to these 5-round wars. He's come accustomed to it. He's a guy that's been very tough to put away, a guy that just hangs around and is somehow able to get a finish. And I think he'll be able to hang around, keep the fight standing long enough to possibly get a knockout in the 4th or 5th round. So I'm going to take the champion, Robbie Lawler, to keep his title in Atlanta. Once again, I am your host, Jim Graham. You can follow me on Twitter at Jim Graham. You can also follow me on Instagram at TheJimGraham. As I mentioned there, earlier on in the program, I had Matt Brown on. So again, thanks to Matt Brown for coming on the show. Once again, I wish him the best of luck there against Jake Ellenberger. I want to thank AJ Hiller, MMASignaturesUSA.com, #1 source for MMA memorabilia in the world. Check out that website, MMASignaturesUSA.com. My friends at the MMAcommunity.com, some of the best forums to chat MMA and also talk to some fighters with their live Q&A sessions. So check them out and sign up. I believe they're actually running a contest right now. So go up and sign up at MMAcommunity.com. Also, my partners at MMAforlife.ca, MMAinsider.net. Also, if you haven't heard already, Beyond the Cage is now on Google Play. So if you have an Android device or prefer listening to Google Play over, again, we're on iTunes as well, but if you prefer listening to Google Play as your source for mobile media store purchases, it's free on there, though. So go over to the Google Play Store, and you can also listen to Beyond the Cage that way, as well as, again, on iTunes, on Stitcher. I back up my most recent interviews on SoundCloud, so you can check, I think it's Personal to Jim Graham on SoundCloud, but you can check out some interviews there as well. And, of course, right here on YouTube, youtube.com/Beyond the Cage Podcast. Subscribe. Please subscribe, share, like, embed, whatever you want to do with the show. Greatly appreciate it. Also, our Facebook page, facebook.com/Beyond the Cage Podcast. We are 24 likes away from 500. Still looking for that 500 likes contest to give away about 10 or so signed 8x10 photos from a whole bunch of different MMA fighters from the UFC and other organizations as well. Speaking of Facebook, the great Facebook blog there, MMA Fight Club, please give them a like, join the discussion. They're always posting up pictures, questions, videos, of course our show there on MMA Fight Club, so check that out at facebook.com/MMA Fight Club. So once again, I am Jim Graham, and thank you for listening to another edition of Beyond the Cage.